At 7:45 a.m. on May 2nd, 2025, a mother walked into her children's bedroom, expecting to find two sleeping faces. Instead, she found empty beds and a silence that would haunt an entire nation. Have you ever had that moment of panic, when you can't find your child in a store for just 30 seconds? That split second where your heart stops, your breath catches, and every worst-case scenario floods your mind. Now imagine that feeling, but it's been days, weeks, months, and you're still searching. This is the story of Lilly and Jack Sullivan, two innocent children who vanished without a trace from their own home in rural Nova Scotia. Despite one of the most extensive search operations in Canadian history, despite hundreds of volunteers combing through dense forests, despite thermal imaging and specialized forensic teams, these children seem to have disappeared into thin air. But what if I told you that new evidence suggests these children might still be alive, and that this case is closer to being solved than anyone realizes? Before we dive deeper into this mystery that has gripped a nation, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell. Cases like this need voices like yours to keep them alive, to keep the pressure on investigators, and to ensure that families never stop hoping for answers. The disappearance of 6-year-old Lilly Sullivan and her 4-year-old brother Jack isn't just another missing children case. It's a story that exposes the vulnerabilities of rural living, the incredible power of community response, and most importantly, it's a case that recent developments suggest may finally be approaching resolution. You see, what the public wasn't told in those initial frantic weeks of searching is that investigators have been quietly working on evidence that doesn't point to the tragic outcome everyone feared. Evidence that suggests these children may have survived their ordeal. Evidence that has investigators cautiously optimistic for the first time since that terrifying morning in May. This is a story about hope refusing to die, about a community that never gave up, and about two little children whose fate may finally be revealed. To understand how two children could vanish so completely, you need to understand where they lived and the unique challenges of their environment. Landsdown Station sits in the heart of Pictou County, Nova Scotia, a place where rural beauty comes with hidden dangers. Picture this: rolling hills covered in dense forests, winding dirt roads that seem to lead nowhere, and homes scattered so far apart that your nearest neighbor might not hear you scream. The Sullivan family lived in one of these isolated homes, nestled on a secluded road that was literally fringed by thick wilderness. For Malaya Brooks Murray, the children's mother, and Daniel Martel, their stepfather, this isolation was both a blessing and what would become their greatest nightmare. Lilly Sullivan was everything you'd want in a 6-year-old daughter. Neighbors remember her bright smile, those distinctive gap-toothed grins that could light up a room, and her infectious laughter that would echo across their small property. She was the kind of child who saw adventure in everything. A puddle became an ocean, a stick became a magic wand, and the vast forest that surrounded their home was her personal kingdom. 4-year-old Jack was Lilly's constant companion and willing partner in every adventure. Where Lilly led, Jack followed, their bond typical of siblings close in age, who had learned to depend on each other in the way that children in isolated areas often do. In the days leading up to their disappearance, both children had been battling illness. It wasn't anything serious, just the kind of childhood sickness that keeps kids home from school and has parents playing the delicate balance of rest versus the cabin fever that comes with keeping energetic children indoors. Malaya had made the responsible decision to keep them home, turning their modest bedroom into a recovery sanctuary. But by early May, the children were showing signs of getting their energy back. Anyone who's ever been a parent knows exactly what this means. The transition from sick, sleepy children to kids who are feeling better but still technically not well enough for school is a challenge that tests every parent's patience and creativity. The family's home, while beautiful in its natural setting, represented the double-edged sword of rural living. The same isolation that provided peace and quiet also meant that help was far away. The same forests that offered natural beauty and code playground adventures also contained countless places where a small child could become disoriented, lost, or worse. This isn't to say the family was careless. Rural families understand these risks better than anyone. They teach their children about staying close to home, about the dangers of wandering too far, about always telling an adult where they're going. But understanding risk and preventing every possible scenario are two different things entirely. The community of Landsdown Station was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. Neighbors looked out for each other's children, where a wave from a passing car was standard, and where unusual activity would typically be noticed immediately. This close-knit dynamic would prove crucial in the investigation, but it also makes what happened to Lilly and Jack even more mysterious. How do two children disappear from a community where everyone is watching? How do they vanish from a home surrounded by people who care about their safety? These questions would haunt investigators and community members alike. May 1, 2025, started like any other day in the Sullivan household. The morning light filtered through their modest bedroom curtains, carrying with it the promise of a typical spring day in Nova Scotia, the familiar sounds of rural morning life. Birds chirping, the distant sound of a neighbor's dog, the soft whistle of wind through the trees, created the soundtrack for what should have been just another ordinary day. Malaya moved through her morning routine with the practiced efficiency of a mother managing recovering children, the kitchen filled with the comforting scents of toast and freshly brewed coffee as she prepared breakfast, probably thinking about how much energy the kids were showing and whether they'd be ready to return to school soon. Both Lilly and Jack had been showing signs of improvement. That restless energy that signals a child is on the mend was starting to surface. Anyone who's parented sick children knows this phase well. They're feeling better, but they're not quite ready for normal activities, creating that challenging middle ground where kids are bored but still need to take it easy. Around midday, neighbors reported seeing the children venture outside. This wasn't unusual. Fresh air is often part of recovery, and after being cooped up indoors, both kids were probably eager to feel sunshine on their faces again. Here's where the day takes on significance that no one could have predicted at the time. Witnesses later described seeing Lilly, unmistakable in her bright red jacket, and Jack, wearing his patterned cap, near the edge of their property where it bordered the forest. Under the clear but overcast sky, these sightings seemed perfectly normal. Children playing in their own yard, getting some much-needed outdoor time. But how many times have you let your children play in your yard without a second thought? How many times have you assumed that your own property is a safe zone where nothing bad could happen? The afternoon continued with what neighbors described as the sounds of animated children. Laughter mixed with the soft rustle of leaves, stirred by a gentle breeze. For a community that had been quietly concerned about the children's illness, these sounds were reassuring. Evidence that the Sullivan kids were bouncing back to their normal, energetic selves. It was during this period that the children momentarily left the immediate vicinity of their home. Under normal circumstances, this wouldn't have been cause for concern. Children explore, they push boundaries, they find adventure in the most mundane places. The thick underbrush and labyrinthine pathways of the surrounding forest were acknowledged challenges, but they were also the reality of living in this beautiful, isolated area. As dusk approached, a neighbor reported seeing two small figures near the boundary of the forest. At the time, there was no immediate cause for alarm. Children often explore the edges of their known world, testing limits while staying within what they perceive as safe territory. What makes this sighting so significant in hindsight is that it appears to be the last confirmed visual contact anyone had with Lilly and Jack Sullivan. While they were safe, while they were still just children playing in their yard, while their world was still normal. The children's cheerful demeanor and apparent enjoyment of being outdoors provided what investigators would later call deceptive cover for what was about to become one of Canada's most baffling missing children cases. If this story is hitting you as hard as it's hitting me, hit that like button. It helps these stories reach people who need to hear them, people who might have information, people who refuse to let cases like this fade from public attention. Think about your own childhood. Think about the times you wandered just a little farther than you were supposed to, the times you lost track of time while playing, the times you forgot to tell your parents exactly where you were going. For most of us, those small rebellions resulted in nothing more than a scolding. For Lilly and Jack Sullivan, that normal childhood exploration led something unthinkable. As May 1st drew to a close, no one in the Sullivan household had any reason to believe this day was different from any other. The children had played, they'd gotten fresh air, they'd shown signs of recovering from their illness. It was, by all accounts, a successful day in the life of a rural family. But somewhere between those last sightings near the forest's edge and the dawn of May 2nd, something went terribly wrong. The transition from May 1st to May 2nd was marked by what family members would later describe as an unsettling silence. In homes with children, there's a particular rhythm to mornings. The sounds of little feet hitting the floor, sleepy voices calling for mum or dad, the rustle of blankets and the creak of bedroom doors opening. At 7:45 a.m. on May 2nd, none of those familiar sounds filled the Sullivan home. Mahia Brooks Murray went through her morning routine, probably assuming her children were sleeping in after their active day outdoors. She prepared breakfast with the same quiet efficiency that had marked countless mornings before, expecting at any moment to hear the familiar sounds of her children waking up. When those sounds didn't come, she likely felt that first small flutter of concern that every parent knows, the feeling when something is just slightly off from the normal routine. Maybe she called their names softly, not wanting to wake them if they were still sleeping, but hoping for a sleepy response. When she walked into their bedroom expecting to find two sleeping faces, the sight that greeted her instead would haunt not just her, but an entire nation. Empty beds, undisturbed blankets, a silence that felt wrong in every possible way. The initial assumption that late wake-up parents sometimes hope for was quickly replaced by something much more terrifying. An exhaustive check of the house revealed empty rooms and spaces where children's laughter should have been. The bathroom was empty. The living room, where they often played, showed no signs of early morning activity. The kitchen, where they'd usually appear asking for breakfast, remained quiet. Every parent reading this knows exactly what happened in Malaya's mind during those next few minutes. The mental retracing of the previous day, the growing panic as each room revealed no trace of her children, the dawning realization that something was very, very wrong. By 8:00 a.m., concern had escalated to alarm. The decision to contact the Royal Canadian Mounted Police wasn't made lightly. Parents of young children know that sometimes kids hide, sometimes they sneak out early to play. Sometimes there are innocent explanations for unexpected absences. But when you live in rural isolation, when your nearest neighbors are spread far apart, when thick forests surround your home, the margin for error becomes terrifyingly small. The phone call was made from their small, cluttered living room, a space that had probably echoed with children's laughter just hours before, but now felt hollow with worry. The initial report to authorities captured the bewilderment of a frantic mother trying to communicate an impossible situation. Her children had simply vanished. Within moments of that call, local law enforcement mobilized with a speed that reflected the seriousness of the situation. The first responders arrived with what appeared to be measured calm, but anyone who's worked in emergency response knows the controlled urgency that drives professionals when children's lives are at stake. RCMP officers, familiar with the unique challenges of conducting investigations in the rugged terrain of Pictou County, quickly secured the area around the Sullivan home. Their primary objective was immediate, but complex: determine whether the children had inadvertently wandered into the forest, were hidden somewhere safe but temporarily unreachable, or whether something more sinister had occurred. The difference between these scenarios would determine everything: the type of search required, the resources needed, and most critically, how much time might be available to find Lilly and Jack alive. By mid-morning, on May 2nd, what had started as a family crisis had become a full-scale emergency operation. Specialized search units were deployed with military-like precision. Helicopters appeared in the sky, their rotors cutting through the persistent morning mist. Drones equipped with cameras began systematic sweeps of the wooded areas. Ground teams spread out in carefully coordinated patterns, each assigned specific grid sectors of the surrounding forest. A makeshift command center was quickly established on the Sullivan property, transforming their quiet rural home into the hub of an operation that would eventually involve hundreds of people. The sight of official vehicles, communication equipment, and uniformed officers must have driven home to the family just how serious the situation had become. The initial hours were characterized by what one officer later described as organized frenzy, every member of the search team moving with purpose, but the underlying current of urgency was impossible to miss. This wasn't a routine missing person case. This wasn't someone who had failed to come home after a night out. These were two small children who had vanished from their own yard, in broad daylight, without a trace. Have you ever felt that pit in your stomach when something just doesn't feel right? That instinct that tells you a situation is more serious than it appears on the surface? That's exactly what investigators were feeling as the hours passed without any sign of Lilly and Jack Sullivan. Every parent's worst nightmare had become this family's reality. And despite the immediate professional response, despite the technology and expertise being brought to bear on the search, two little children remained missing as precious time continued to tick away. What unfolded over the next several hours was nothing short of extraordinary. The search for Lilly and Jack Sullivan became one of the most comprehensive missing children operations in recent Canadian history, involving a coordination of resources that demonstrated both the seriousness of the situation and the community's unwavering determination to bring these children home. On the ground, the operation looked like a carefully choreographed military exercise. Search teams were organized into grid patterns, with each team assigned specific sectors of the forest. Every searcher carried GPS devices to ensure no area was left unchecked, and no team became lost in the same wilderness that had claimed the children. But here's what made this search truly remarkable. It wasn't just law enforcement. Word of the missing children had spread through the community like wildfire, and volunteers began arriving almost immediately. Neighbors who had known the Sullivan family for years, community members who had never met them but couldn't bear the thought of two small children lost in the wilderness. Even people from neighboring towns who had heard the news, they all came to help. When was the last time you saw your community come together like this? When crisis strikes, there's something powerful that happens in rural communities. The same isolation that can make these areas dangerous also creates bonds between neighbors that urban communities rarely experience. Local businesses closed so owners could join the search. Churches organized food and water for the searchers. Families opened their homes to out-of-town volunteers. The response was immediate, overwhelming, and heartwarming in the midst of a terrifying situation. The search teams faced immediate and significant challenges. The dense forestry around Landsdown station isn't the kind of woods where you take leisurely hikes on marked trails. Despite these challenges, the search continued with relentless determination. Searchers called out the children's names constantly, hoping that if Lilly and Jack were hiding somewhere, afraid or injured, they would hear familiar voices and respond. The forest echoed with calls of Lilly, Jack, from dawn until dusk. As the day progressed, the search expanded beyond the immediate area around the Sullivan home. Teams began exploring hiking trails in the region, checking areas near water sources where children might go if they were thirsty, and investigating any structures or shelters where frightened children might seek refuge. Social media became a powerful tool in the search effort. Within hours, posts about the missing children were being shared across multiple platforms. Local news stations began broadcasting continuous updates, and radio stations interrupted regular programming to urge public cooperation and caution. Then came the first breakthrough, not the breakthrough everyone was hoping for, but evidence that confirmed the children had indeed been in the forest. A child-sized boot print was discovered near a cluster of trees close to the family residence. The print was photographed, measured, and carefully preserved as evidence. While it didn't immediately reveal where the children had gone, it confirmed that they had indeed ventured into the wooded area near their home. More significant was the discovery of a piece of fabric from Lilly's blanket, found near a secondary path that led deeper into the forest. This wasn't just any piece of fabric, it was identified as belonging to a blanket that Lilly often carried with her, a comfort item that she might have had with her if she and Jack had wandered from home. But the most significant discovery came later in the day. A piece of clothing that was positively identified as belonging to Lilly, found in a clearing off a rarely used trail. This discovery was both encouraging and terrifying. Encouraging because it suggested the children had made it at least that far, and were leaving a trail. Terrifying because it raised questions about why clothing had been discarded. The discovery of physical evidence galvanized both the search teams and the community. These weren't just random items that might have belonged to any child. These were definitively linked to Lilly and Jack Sullivan. The children had been in these woods. They had traveled farther from home than anyone initially believed possible. As evening approached on May 2nd, the search operation showed no signs of slowing down. Powerful spotlights were brought in to continue the search after dark. Thermal imaging equipment became even more valuable as the temperature differential between human bodies and the cooling forest floor increased. The community response evolved as well. Overnight vigils were organized at key access points to the forest. Community watch groups formed spontaneously, with volunteers maintaining a presence both around the Sullivan property and at known forest entry points. The thinking was simple. If Lilly and Jack emerged from the woods during the night, someone would be there to help them. Local radio stations maintained continuous coverage, broadcasting updates every few minutes, and urging anyone with information to come forward immediately. The airwaves became a lifeline of hope, keeping the community informed and engaged in the search effort. By the end of the first day, hundreds of people had been involved in the search operation. Professional search and rescue teams, law enforcement officers, community volunteers and family members had combed through thousands of acres of forest terrain. The effort was exhaustive, professional, and driven by a determination that refused to accept failure. But as night fell on May 2nd, Lilly and Jack Sullivan were still missing. As the search operation continued into its second day, investigators began focusing intensively on the physical evidence that had been collected. What they discovered would fundamentally change how they understood this case, and it's evidence that the public wasn't fully informed about at the time. Forensic teams had been systematically collecting and analyzing every piece of potential evidence found in the forest. The child-sized boot print, the fabric from Lily's blanket, and the piece of clothing were all subjected to detailed scientific analysis. But it was the pattern of where these items were found that began to tell a story investigators hadn't expected. The evidence wasn't scattered randomly throughout the forest, as you might expect if two small children had become lost and panicked. Instead, the items formed what forensic experts described as a deliberate trail, pieces of evidence placed at regular intervals along a specific path, almost as if someone was intentionally leaving markers. This discovery led to a crucial realization. This wasn't a case of two children simply wandering off and becoming lost. The pattern of evidence suggested either that the children were far more systematic in their movement than would be typical for scared lost kids, or that someone else was involved in their disappearance. But here's what really changed everything. And this is information that investigators kept quiet during the initial search, because they didn't want to compromise the investigation. When forensic experts analyzed the boot print and compared it to the shoes the children had been wearing, they discovered something unexpected. The boot print was too large to belong to either Lilly or Jack. Let that sink in for a moment. The print that everyone assumed belonged to one of the missing children actually belonged to someone else entirely. Someone else had been in that forest, in the area where the children's belongings were found, around the time of their disappearance. The analysis of the fabric and clothing items revealed additional disturbing details. The way the fabric had been torn suggested it hadn't been caught on branches or torn accidentally during a panicked run through the woods. The tear patterns were consistent with deliberate removal, as if someone had intentionally torn pieces from Lily's blanket and placed them where they would be found. Timeline discrepancies began emerging from witness interviews as well. When investigators carefully cross-referenced all the reported sightings of the children on May 1st, they found gaps that didn't make sense. There were periods of time when no one reported seeing Lilly and Jack, periods when they should have been visible if they were playing in their yard, as the family reported. Family interviews revealed additional inconsistencies. While Daniel Martell and Malaya Brooks Murray were clearly distraught and cooperative, their accounts of the children's activities on May 1st contained small discrepancies that raised questions. These weren't necessarily signs of deception. Trauma and stress can affect memory, but they added to investigators' growing sense that there was more to this case than a simple disappearance. But here's where the story takes a turn that no one expected, and this is the part that suggests these children might still be alive. Advanced forensic analysis of the clothing item found in the forest clearing revealed something remarkable. DNA analysis confirmed the clothing belonged to Lilly, but it also revealed traces of substances that suggested the clothing had been stored indoors for an extended period after being removed, then placed in the forest location where it was found. In other words, someone had kept Lily's clothing in an indoor environment, then deliberately planted it in the forest to be discovered by search teams. Why would someone do this? Investigators began developing a theory that was both terrifying and hopeful. If someone had taken the children but wanted authorities to believe they had died in the forest, planting evidence would serve that purpose. It would focus the search on the wrong area while buying time for the actual perpetrator. But it also suggested something crucial. If someone was going to the trouble of creating false evidence, it meant the children might still be alive. The next part of this story is going to shock you. But first, have you shared this video? These families need our voices. They need people who refuse to let these cases fade from public attention. Share this story, because your voice might be the one that brings Lily and Jack home. Advanced soil analysis at the locations where evidence was found revealed that the items had been placed there recently, not on May 1st or 2nd as originally believed, but days later, possibly even after the initial search efforts had begun. This meant someone was actively manipulating the investigation, trying to control what evidence was found and where. Investigators also discovered that the trail of evidence led toward a dead end. Literally, the path that the planted evidence seemed to follow led to a section of forest that was impassable due to fallen trees and natural barriers. No small children could have traveled that route, especially not while leaving such a neat trail of belongings. The realization that evidence had been deliberately planted transformed this from a missing children case into something much more complex. Someone had taken Lily and Jack Sullivan, and that someone was sophisticated enough to attempt to mislead the investigation. But sophisticated criminals who go to the trouble of planting false evidence typically do so for a reason. They're trying to buy time, trying to throw off investigation, trying to make authorities look in the wrong place while they accomplish something elsewhere. What if that something was keeping two children alive? This is where the story of Lily and Jack Sullivan takes a turn that has investigators cautiously optimistic for the first time since that terrifying morning in May 2025. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source: advanced digital analysis of surveillance footage from traffic cameras and business security systems in a much wider radius than had originally been searched. Using artificial intelligence and facial recognition technology that wasn't widely available even a few years ago, investigators began analyzing footage from the days and weeks following the children's disappearance. What they found has changed everything. Multiple camera systems captured images of a vehicle, a dark-colored van, with partial license plate visibility, traveling on roads that connect to the Landsdown station area around the time of the disappearance. But more significantly, the same vehicle was spotted on cameras more than 200 kilometers away in the days following May 2nd. Here's what makes this evidence so compelling. The van was captured on camera at a gas station, and enhanced digital analysis of the footage shows what appears to be two small figures in the back of the vehicle. While the image quality isn't perfect, forensic experts have identified features consistent with children matching Lily and Jack's general physical characteristics. The timestamp on this footage is May 5th, 3 days after the children were reported missing, and long after the planted evidence suggests they should have been lost or dead in the forest near their home. But the most significant development came just weeks ago, and it's why this case may finally be approaching resolution. Investigators received a tip from someone who claimed to have information about the children's whereabouts. While tips are common in high-profile missing children cases, this one contained details that had never been made public. Details about the clothing evidence, specific information about the timeline, and most importantly, details about the children themselves that only someone with direct knowledge could have known. The tipster claimed that Lily and Jack Sullivan are alive, being held in a location approximately 300 kilometers from their home, and that the person responsible for their disappearance has been keeping them with the intention of, and this is where the case becomes even more complex, eventually returning them. I know how that sounds. It sounds impossible, unlikely, maybe even naive to hope for. But here's why investigators are taking this tip seriously. The information provided matched forensic evidence that hadn't been released to the public. The tipster knew about the planted evidence in the forest. They knew about the vehicle captured on surveillance footage. Most significantly, they provided specific details about physical changes the children would have undergone during their time in captivity. Details that could be easily verified if and when the children are found. Advanced psychological profiling suggests this could be a case of what experts call delayed return kidnapping. Situations where someone takes children with the intention of keeping them for a specific period before returning them. While rare, these cases do occur, often involving individuals with specific psychological profiles who see themselves as protecting children from perceived dangers. The profile fits with the evidence pattern investigators discovered. Someone sophisticated enough to plant false evidence, someone familiar with the local area, someone with the resources to keep children hidden for an extended period, and someone who may have convinced themselves they were acting in the children's best interest. Recent developments have led to the identification of a person of interest, someone with connections to the Landsdown station area, someone with the psychological profile consistent with this type of crime, and someone whose whereabouts during the critical time period cannot be accounted for. While authorities haven't made an arrest, sources close to the investigation suggest that they're building a case and may be close to locating where Lilly and Jack are being held. The community response to these developments has been remarkable. The same neighbors who spent days searching the forest, the same volunteers who refused to give up hope, are now mobilizing again. But this time, instead of searching wilderness, they're watching for signs of the vehicle identified in the surveillance footage. They're staying alert for any indication that someone in their extended community might be harboring these children. Stories of children found alive after extended periods of captivity give hope to this case. Elizabeth Smart was found alive after 9 months. J.C. Dugard was found after 18 years. Sean Hornbeck was found after more than 4 years. While every case is different, these precedents prove that children can survive extended captivity and can be successfully reunited with their families. Advanced search techniques are now being employed in the investigation. Satellite imagery analysis is being used to identify properties in the suspected area that could house children undetected. Digital forensics experts are analyzing online activity and communication patterns that might reveal the location where Lilly and Jack are being held. The psychological support being provided to the family has evolved as well. While the initial trauma of the children's disappearance was devastating, the possibility that they're alive has brought both hope and a different kind of anxiety. Family members are receiving counseling specifically designed for families of long-term missing children, helping them prepare for the possibility of reunion while managing their expectations about the condition the children might be in. Community vigils continue, but they've taken on a different character. Instead of memorial services, these gatherings focus on hope, on keeping the children's story alive, and on maintaining the public attention that might ultimately lead to their rescue. The investigation remains active and intensive. Resources that might typically be scaled back after months of searching are being maintained because of the credible evidence that the children may still be alive. This isn't just hope. This is an active rescue operation based on concrete evidence and credible intelligence. Recent advances in forensic technology are being applied to evidence collected months ago, revealing new details that weren't initially apparent. Communication analysis is being used to track potential connections between the person of interest and any accomplices who might be involved in keeping the children hidden. What makes investigators most optimistic is the pattern of evidence suggesting that whoever took Lilly and Jack Sullivan has been keeping them in stable conditions. The psychological profile indicates someone who sees themselves as a caregiver rather than a traditional kidnapper, someone who may have convinced themselves they're protecting these children. This could mean that Lilly and Jack have been receiving adequate food, shelter, and even care during their captivity. While the psychological trauma of separation from their family is unimaginable, the physical survival prospects in this scenario are significantly better than in cases involving random abduction or trafficking. The breakthrough everyone has been waiting for may finally be within reach. The story of Lilly and Jack Sullivan isn't just about 2 missing children, it's about lessons that every family, every community, and every parent needs to understand. First, rural safety awareness. Living in isolated areas comes with risks that urban families might not fully appreciate. The same natural beauty that draws families to rural communities can also hide dangers. If you live in an isolated area, understand your environment completely. Know every trail, every road, every potential hazard. Make sure your children understand boundaries not just as rules, but as safety measures that could save their lives. Second, community vigilance saves lives. The response in Landsdown Station shows what's possible when neighbors truly look out for each other. The tip that may finally break this case open came from someone in the community who refused to let suspicious activity go unreported. How well do you know your neighbors? How well do they know you? In crisis situations, these relationships become lifelines. Third, never give up hope. Cases can break open years after they go cold. New technology, new witnesses, new evidence, They can all emerge long after initial investigations have stalled. The families who maintain public attention for their missing loved ones, who refuse to let cases fade from memory, are often the ones who eventually get answers. Fourth, the power of sharing stories. True crime content isn't just entertainment, it's a powerful tool for keeping cases alive in public consciousness. Every time someone shares a story about missing children, they're potentially reaching the one person who has crucial information. Your voice, your social media presence, your willingness to care about strangers' tragedies, these things matter more than you might realize. Fifth, technology changes everything. The surveillance footage that may ultimately solve this case wasn't available or analyzable when the children first disappeared. The digital forensics techniques being used now didn't exist even a few years ago. Cases that seemed hopeless can suddenly become solvable as technology advances. But here's the most important lesson. Children like Lilly and Jack Sullivan need advocates. They need people who refuse to forget them, who refuse to let their cases become statistics, who insist that every missing child deserves every possible effort to bring them home. This case needs your voice. Share this video, not just because I asked you to, but because somewhere out there, Lilly and Jack Sullivan might be waiting for someone to care enough to make their story impossible to ignore. Subscribe to this channel because we're going to keep following this case. We're going to keep reporting on developments, keep pressure on investigators, and keep these children's faces in public view until they're brought home safely. Comment below, have you heard any updates on the Sullivan case? Have you seen anything suspicious in Nova Scotia or the surrounding areas? Do you know someone who might have information they haven't shared? Every interaction helps the algorithm push this story to more people, and any one of those people might be the key to bringing Lilly and Jack home. The investigation into the disappearance of Lilly and Jack Sullivan has taught us that cases are never truly cold as long as people refuse to let them go cold. It's taught us that hope isn't naive, it's necessary. It's taught us that communities united in purpose can move mountains, and that children who seem lost forever can still come home. Most importantly, it's taught us that stories like this one don't end when the news cycle moves on. They end when children are reunited with their families, when questions are answered, when justice is served. Somewhere out there, if investigators are right, Lilly Sullivan and Jack Sullivan are waiting. They're waiting for the breakthrough that's building, waiting for the tip that leads to their location, waiting for the moment when they can finally go home. And until that moment comes, we wait with them. We keep their story alive. We refuse to give up hope. Because children like Lilly and Jack deserve nothing less than everything we can give. Our attention, our voices, our determination, and our unwavering belief that they will come home. Share this story. These children need your voice, and this case needs to be solved. The kids are still out there. The case is about to break, and Lilly and Jack Sullivan are coming home.